My name is Martha Hally, and I'm the costume designer for A MIDSUMMER NIGHT'S DREAM. Often the fairies become more of a humans in exile, humans that have become feral because they've been living in the woods for so long. And that's not what Sandy wanted. He was clear that he wanted to create a group of magical creatures that we've never seen before. So I started to get interested in the idea of, well, if they're not human, what would their skin look like? And I thought maybe that would be the jumping off point for me in terms of how to design for them. So I started not at the drawing table, I started in the fabric stores because I wanted to see what I could use out there for fabulous magical skin. And it turns out that this year there's a lot of great things in the stretch fabric world for all sorts of things. Stretch clothing is very popular right now. So I was lucky that way. And I started looking at some things that have a lot of animal prints and thinking, well, what could we do to these to turn them into fairy skin? And so I started off just by buying a bunch of yardage, and we started painting and dyeing into them to see if we could make them look less like leopards and zebras and so forth, and make them start to look like something that you've never seen before. And then we started talking about adding in other things that have texture and look like, maybe look sort of like scales. But we don't want them to be scales, we want them to be sort of a metaphor for scales, because we're not creating a specific creature. We're not doing wings, we're not doing tails, we're just trying to create a totally new impression of a species. And that seemed to be going in the right direction. And then we had to think about, well, what do we do with their hair? And so we started thinking about using hair in a new and creative way and combining it with things that look like moss and things that look like dried leaves. And eventually we started thinking about, well, we have Titania's fairies and we have Oberon's fairies, and maybe we could make them look different. So we started talking about Titania's fairies coming from the sky, from above ground, and maybe they're lighter in color and texture. And Oberon's guys are a little stronger, and maybe they come out of the earth. So they represent earth and moss and dried leaves and mud, and that helped us a lot because then it allowed us to have some variety in the looks. The entire surround of the set is foliage, is a sort of impressionistic foliage wall. And we decided to carry that forward into the fairies because they kind of morph out of that wall, and that's their world. Peas Blossom, for example, I wanted to think about where would be the core of her in terms of where her seeds would be. And I sort of decided they're in the back of her head. So that's where most of her blossoms would sprout from in order to fertilize. Moth was hard because we didn't want to do wings, and she's the only named character that is an insect, that is suggestive of an insect. So we kind of came up with a deconstructed version of wings, sort of in a Martha Graham kind of idea of a stretch fabric that you don't see the wings, but when she opens her arms, you could see that she might be able to take flight with the garment that she's wearing, sort of like those flying suits that those guys jump off mountains in. There are very few named characters in the fairy world, but Mustard Seed has to have mustard seeds somewhere. So I was actually influenced by a piece that I saw at a museum in New York where they had taken spandex and red spandex and stuffed it with lentils. And so, and attached it to the wall, so it looked like blood drops just hanging. And I love the idea of this mustard seed pouch, it's full of seeds and it's ready to burst. So I thought, let's see if we can replicate that in a small detail. So she'll be dripping with little yellow seed pods that should look like they're ready to pop open. So, you know, you just try to find inspiration everywhere. I think it's part of the costume designer's job is to just be a very observant person, and I always try to do that, is look at something and sort of file it away and say, how can I use that later on?